Varathkel had read every report the Galactic Council had on human warfare. He had studied the numbers, the casualty counts, the weapon classifications, the territorial maps. He had sat through 4 separate briefings given by analysts who had never once set foot on a human warfront. He thought he was ready. He was not ready. The transport that carried him down to the surface of Kale 4 was a human military shuttle, boxy, loud, and smelling of oil and something burned. 2 human soldiers sat across from him the whole ride down, both in full combat gear, both staring at nothing in particular. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them looked nervous. The planet below was actively contested. Enemy fire had been reported in the landing zone as recently as 6 hours ago, and these 2 soldiers sat there like they were on their way to a meal. Varathkel gripped the edge of his seat and said nothing. The shuttle hit the ground hard. The ramp dropped. Heat and noise came in all at once. Distant booming that rolled across the flat, broken land like slow thunder, the smell of smoke and burned earth, the sound of vehicles and voices and equipment all moving at the same time. Varathkel stepped out and stood still for a moment, just taking it in. A woman walked up to him fast. She was not tall, but she moved like someone who owned the ground she stood on. She had short dark hair, a rifle on her back, and the kind of expression that did not waste time. "Varathkel," she said, "I'm Lieutenant Grace Nolan. I've been assigned to you for the duration of your visit. Stay close. Do what I say when I say it. And don't touch anything without asking me first." She did not wait for him to respond. She turned and walked and expected him to follow. He followed. The forward observation post was a collection of low structures dug into the earth and reinforced with metal and sandbags. It did not look like much, but the moment Varathkel stepped inside the perimeter, he felt something change in the air, a kind of organized energy, tight and deliberate. Soldiers moved between stations. Screens showed maps and feeds. People talked in short, clipped sentences. Nobody was panicking. Nobody was loud. Everyone was working. Grace led him through the post and stopped outside a command structure near the center. She knocked once and pushed the door open. The man inside was sitting at a table covered in maps and data slates. He looked up when they entered. He was not large. He was not young. He had a lined face, pale eyes, and gray at his temples. He wore no decoration on his uniform beyond his rank. He looked like someone who had been tired for a very long time and had simply made peace with it. "Colonel Carter Briggs," Grace said. "This is the Council's observer." Briggs stood and extended his hand. Varathkel had studied human greetings. He took the hand and shook it. Briggs had a firm grip. Not aggressive, just certain. "Glad to have you with us," Briggs said. "I'll be honest with you. I'm not entirely comfortable having a civilian this close to an active front. But orders are orders. Grace will keep you safe. Just listen to her." "I will," Varathkel said. Briggs nodded and looked back at his maps. The meeting was over. Varathkel had expected something more. A speech, perhaps. Or at least some acknowledgement of the significance of the visit. The first alien ever granted access to a human combat zone. But Briggs had already moved on. There was work to do. Grace showed him to a small room at the edge of the post, a narrow cot, a single light, a sealed window that looked out toward the east where the sky was the color of old copper from the smoke. "Get some rest if you can," she said. "It gets loud at night." She was right. Varathkel was lying on the cot 3 hours later when the first impact hit. It was not close, maybe 2 kilometers out, but the ground shook. He sat up fast, his heart's hammering, every instinct in his body screaming at him to move. He got to the door and pushed it open, expecting chaos. What he found was Corporal Danny Pruitt, sitting on an overturned crate outside, eating from a metal container with a small spoon, looking completely unbothered. The next impact came. Closer this time. The ground shook harder. A distant flash lit the copper sky. Pruitt looked up at Varathkel and said, "Long-range stuff. They can't hit anything with it at this distance. They just do it to ruin our sleep." He scooped another spoonful and added, It works, honestly. I haven't slept a full night in 2 weeks. Varath Kell stared at him. Are you not afraid? Pruitt thought about it genuinely, like it was a real question that deserved a real answer. Sure, he said, but being afraid doesn't stop the shells, so. He shrugged and kept eating. More soldiers had come out of their structures. A few sat together nearby, talking in low voices. One was sharpening something. Another was reading from a small device. One woman was doing slow stretches against the wall of her structure like this was a perfectly normal evening. None of them looked at the sky with anything more than mild annoyance. Varath Kell went back inside and sat on his cot and opened his data recorder. He sat quietly for a moment, trying to find the right words. The shelling continued outside in a slow, irregular rhythm. After a while, it stopped. The post went quiet again. Somewhere nearby, 2 soldiers were having a quiet argument about something that had happened in a card game earlier. He finally spoke into the recorder. First observation, he said. The humans at this post received sustained indirect fire this evening. I observed approximately 14 soldiers in the open or semi-open during the engagement. None of them took cover. And none of them appeared to alter their behavior in any significant way. One soldier continued eating his meal. I am not certain whether this is a product of extensive training, genuine fearlessness, or something else entirely. I do not yet have a word for it. He paused. I have spent 11 years as a council attaché. I have visited conflict zones on 7 worlds. On every one of those worlds, sentient beings caught in artillery fire exhibit the same behavior. They run, they hide, they cry out. The soldiers here did none of those things. They sat in the open and complained about losing sleep. He paused again. I am starting to wonder whether the reports the council received were not exaggerated at all. I am starting to wonder if they were not exaggerated enough. He set the recorder down. Outside, the Pruitt had apparently found someone to share his food with. Varath Kell could hear low laughter. The copper sky had gone dark. The stars over Kale 4 were dim through the smoke, but they were there. Grace knocked on his door at that point and leaned in. You all right? She asked. I am fine, he said. I was just recording some notes. She nodded and started to leave. He stopped her. Lieutenant Nolan, he said. The soldier outside, the one who was eating. He told me the shelling happens to ruin your sleep. He said it works. And then he kept eating. Grace almost smiled. That sounds like Pruitt. Does it not bother him? She leaned against the door frame and looked at him in a way that was not unkind, but was very direct. Everything bothers us, she said. We just don't stop. She pulled the door closed. Varath Kell sat alone in the narrow room, listening to the distant sounds of the post settling into its night routine. Boots on hard ground, the low hum of equipment, a voice somewhere calling out a shift change. All of it calm, all of it steady. He did not sleep for a long time. Dawn on Kale. 4 came in slow and gray, the sky the color of ash, the air cold and carrying the smell of smoke from fires burning somewhere far to the north. Varath Kell was already awake when Grace knocked on his door. He had barely slept. She looked like she had slept perfectly fine. We're moving forward in 20 minutes, she said. Get your gear on, stay behind me. Don't speak unless I speak to you first. He had been issued a set of human field clothes, thick, dull-colored, and heavy. He put them on and followed her out into the early light. The squad was already assembled near the post's eastern exit. 12 soldiers, all in full combat gear, checking weapons and equipment with quick, practiced hands. They did not make a lot of noise. There was no rallying speech, no dramatic moment. Sergeant Lou Caffrey walked down the line once, looking at each soldier, said, All right, let's go. And that was it. They moved. Varath Kell had seen other species move through hostile terrain. Most of them moved with visible fear, fast and hunched and looking around too much, bodies tight, movements jerky. Caffrey's squad moved completely differently. They were low and quiet and spread out in a way that felt almost instinctive. No one bumped into anyone. No one got too close. And they moved through the broken outskirts of a settlement that had been half destroyed by previous fighting. Crumbled walls, burned structures, debris scattered across every surface. And they moved through it like water finding its way through stone. Easy, certain, quiet. Vareth Kell walked near the center of the column beside Grace and did his best to keep up. She moved exactly like the others, like she had done this 10,000 times and expected to do it 10,000 more. The settlement opened up into a wide stretch of flat ground, and Caffrey signaled a halt with one raised fist. Everyone stopped. No one spoke. Vareth Kell stopped and watched and tried to understand what Caffrey had seen. He could not see anything. The ground ahead looked empty. Caffrey crouched and stared for a long moment. And then he turned to the soldier beside him, a young man named Aaron Holt, barely old enough to look like he belonged in a uniform, and said something quietly. Holt nodded and moved left without hesitation, taking two others with him. Caffrey waited 30 seconds and then moved the rest of the squad right, keeping low. The split happened so smoothly that Vareth Kell almost missed it. One moment there were 12 soldiers. The next moment there were two separate groups moving in different directions, both of them disappearing into the terrain like they had been absorbed by it. What happened next came fast. A burst of enemy fire opened up from a position ahead, targeting where the squad had just been. Caffrey's group was already gone from that spot. Holt's group was already at the enemy's flank. There was a brief exchange of fire, close, loud, violent, and then it was over. 40 seconds, maybe less. Vareth Kell stood very still and breathed. Caffrey walked forward to the cleared position like he was crossing a street. He looked at the two enemy combatants on the ground. Both wounded, both alive. He crouched next to the first one and spoke into his comm unit, calling for medical support. Then he looked at the second one, checked the wound, and did the same. Vareth Kell caught up to Grace and said quietly, "They are calling medical support for the enemy wounded." "Yes," she said. "Why?" She looked at him like the question confused her a little. "Because they're wounded," she said. He opened his mouth and closed it again. He had no answer for that. The squad kept moving. They pushed deeper into the settlement, clearing structures one by one. The process was deliberate and methodical. 2 soldiers at every entry point, one covering while the other moved inside, hand signals and short words, every room checked. Vareth Kell had read that humans in combat were wild, brutal, driven by adrenaline into something almost animalistic. Every report from every alien who had studied human warfare from a distance said the same thing. What he was watching was the opposite of that. This was a machine made of people, and every part of it was working exactly as it was supposed to. He started recording notes into his data slate as he walked, keeping up with Grace, writing down everything he saw. They reached the far end of the settlement by mid-morning. The squad had cleared 18 structures, taken 1 set of enemy wounded, and had not lost a single person. Caffrey called a short rest, and the soldiers sat where they were. Some against walls, some on the ground, and ate or drank or checked their equipment. Private Aaron Holt sat nearby, wrapping something around his left forearm. Vareth Kell looked closer and saw that there was blood soaking through the cloth. He moved toward Holt and said, "You are wounded." Holt looked up at him with mild surprise. This was apparently the first time the alien had spoken to him directly. "Yeah," he said. "Caught some debris on the flank. It's not bad. It is bleeding. I know." Holt tied the cloth tight, tested it with his fingers, seemed satisfied, and picked his rifle back up. Vareth Kell stared at him. "It really isn't bad," Holt said, a little more gently this time, apparently interpreting the stare as concern. "I've had worse." Vareth Kell did not know how to explain that the stare was not concern. It was something closer to disbelief. He had watched this same young man flank an enemy position, move through direct fire, and take a wound. And now he was sitting on a broken wall in a bombed-out settlement, making sure a rag was tied tight enough. and his expression was calm. Not brave calm, not forcing it calm, just calm. Caffrey came over and checked the wound himself, said something quietly to Holt, and Holt shook his head and said he was fine. Caffrey looked at it another second, nodded, and moved on to check on the next soldier. He did not make a fuss. Neither did Holt. By the time they moved out again, Vareth Kell had filled 4 pages of notes. He kept writing. He had been trained to observe and record, to be neutral and clinical, or to watch without judgment. But neutrality was getting harder to maintain. He watched Caffrey take point at the edge of the settlement and scan the terrain ahead with total focus. He watched Grace move up beside him and exchange a few quiet words, both of them reading the ground like they were reading a text they had studied before. He watched Pruitt behind them, relaxed but alert, cracking one quiet joke to the soldier beside him and then going still the moment Caffrey raised a hand. One raised hand. 12 people froze, not because they were afraid, because they trusted the hand. Vareth Kell had studied command structures across 17 species. He knew what fear-based discipline looked like, and he knew what earned trust discipline looked like. This was the second kind. These soldiers did not follow Caffrey because they had to. And they followed him because somewhere along the way, he had proven to every single one of them that he was worth following. That, Vareth Kell wrote in his notes, was perhaps the most dangerous thing he had seen all day. He paused, looked at the squad spread out ahead of him in the gray morning light, and added one more line. And the day is not over yet. War had a rhythm to it. Vareth Kell had not expected that. He had expected constant noise, constant movement, constant violence. What he found instead was something that moved in waves, hard and fast and then suddenly still, like the world was catching its breath before the next push. And it was in the stillness between the fighting that Vareth Kell began to see things no report had ever mentioned. The soldiers slept in shifts. That was the first thing he noticed. 2 hours, sometimes 3, curled up on cots or on the ground or sitting upright against a wall with their rifles across their laps. Then they were up and working again. No alarm, no fuss. They simply opened their eyes, and they got up, and they went back to whatever needed doing. He watched this happen again and again over 3 days, and it never stopped being strange to him. On his world, sleep deprivation was considered a form of harm. Here, it seemed to be considered a schedule. He asked Grace about it on the 4th morning. She was sitting outside the command structure with a cup of something hot, watching the eastern horizon, where the sky was starting to lighten. "Does it not damage you?" he asked. "The broken sleep?" She thought about it, turning the cup in her hands. "It damages us," she said. "We just push through it. You get used to feeling a little broken." "And that is acceptable to you?" She looked at him. "No," she said, "but it's what the job requires." So. He had heard that word used that way several times now, not as an ending to a thought, but as a closing of a door. This is unpleasant, so we continue. This is difficult, so we adapt. This costs us something, so we pay it and move on. He wrote it in his notes. He underlined it. He spent the afternoon of the 4th day simply watching the post operate. He walked slowly from station to station, saying little, just watching. A repair team was working on a vehicle that had taken damage 2 days ago. They worked without stopping, passing tools back and forth without asking, communicating in short phrases or just looks. A communications officer named Specialist Carla Voss sat at her station managing 4 separate channels at once, her voice calm and even whether she was routing a supply request or relaying a fire support call. In the moments when the channels went quiet, she had a small paper notebook open beside her equipment, and she was drawing in it, small, detailed portraits of the people around her. He stopped and looked at one of the drawings. It was Caffrey, done in pencil, sitting the way he always sat when he was thinking, arms resting on his knees, looking at the ground. The drawing caught something real about him, something quiet and weighty. "You draw," Vareth Kell said. Carla looked up. She had clearly not noticed him approach. Yeah, she said. Ma keeps my hands busy when the channels are quiet. It is very accurate. She glanced at the drawing. I just try to catch what people look like when they don't know they're being watched, she said. That's when you see the real thing. She went back to her channels. Vareth Kell stood there a moment longer, looking at the notebook, and then moved on. He found something similar everywhere he looked. Private Aaron Holt, the one with the wrapped forearm, was teaching himself a card trick during a rest period, failing at it repeatedly, and starting over each time with the same patient expression. Danny Pruitt had apparently lost a bet of some kind, and was now required to do an impression of the post's cook every time someone asked him to, which they asked him to far too often, and which he did with complete commitment every time, despite claiming loudly that he hated all of them. And Colonel Carter Briggs walked the post every evening. Vareth Kell saw it for the first time on the fourth night, and then made a point of watching it every night after. Briggs would finish his work at the command table and then simply walk, no escort, no agenda, just moving through the post in a slow circuit. He stopped at every station. He spoke to every person he encountered, and he knew things. He knew the name of Holt's younger brother back home. He knew that Caffrey had a daughter who had just started walking. He knew that one of the soldiers in the communications section had received bad news from home 2 days ago, and he stopped at that station longest of all, saying nothing important, just being there. Vareth Kell watched this from a distance and felt something he could not quite name. He had studied leadership structures across many species. He had seen command hierarchies built on fear, on tradition, on law, on status. He had seen commanders who were worshipped and commanders who were merely obeyed. He had never seen a commander who simply walked among his people in the dark and remembered what they cared about. Then the fifth night came. He was in his room when he heard the difference in the sounds outside, not the slow, irregular shelling he had grown half used to, but something closer, sharper. He was out the door before Grace reached him. "Stay inside," she said. "What is happening?" "Night raid. They got inside the outer perimeter. Stay in this building." He stayed in the doorway instead, which was close enough to inside that she did not argue. He watched the post respond to the breach, soldiers moving fast and quiet toward the sound. No panic, no shouting, just people doing what they had trained to do. It was over in less than 8 minutes. But 2 soldiers did not come back. He learned their names the next morning. He did not write them here. It felt wrong to record them in a list of observations. They were people, not data points. What he did record was what happened in the hours after. The soldiers who had fought beside them came back to the post, put down their gear, and were quiet for a while. Not long, an hour maybe. Some of them sat together. Some of them were alone. Pruitt, who had been making people laugh for 4 days straight, sat against the outside wall of his structure and stared at nothing. And then nobody bothered him and nobody made jokes. Then, slowly, they got up. They picked their gear back up. They went back to their stations. Vareth Kell watched this and felt something press against the inside of his chest that he did not have a word for in his own language. He went to his room and sat on the cot for a long time. He asked Grace about it that evening. "How do they do it?" he said. "They lose someone, they grieve, and then they return. How is that possible?" She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the floor and then back at him. "We carry them with us," she said. "That's the only way I know how to explain it. They don't go anywhere. We just keep going and we bring them along." Vareth Kell looked at her for a long time. Then he picked up his recorder and spoke into it slowly. "6th day. I have now observed this unit absorb loss and return to full operational function within hours. I have watched them grieve without collapsing. I have watched them feel everything: exhaustion, fear, grief, humor, love, and continue working through all of it simultaneously." He paused. "The most dangerous thing about humans is not their weapons or their tactics or their physical endurance. It is this: They do not require the absence of pain in order to function. They have learned, somehow, to function inside of it. He set the recorder down. Outside, Briggs was walking his circuit. The post was quiet and steady around him. Somewhere across the camp, someone laughed at something Pruitt had said. They were still going. The sixth day started quiet. Too quiet, Grace said, and the way she said it made Vareth Kell pay attention. She had spent the morning walking the perimeter twice, speaking in short, careful sentences to the watch teams, looking out at the terrain with the kind of focus that had nothing casual in it. Briggs had been at the command table since before dawn. The maps on the screens had changed. More markers, more movement indicators to the east. "Something is coming," Vareth Kell said to Grace. "Yes," she said. "What do you need me to do?" "Get in the bunker when I tell you, and stay there." The attack came just before midday. It came from 3 directions at once: east, northeast, and a probe from the south that Caffrey's section picked up early and shut down fast. But the east and northeast pushes were serious. They came in hard, with armor support and sustained fire, pushing against the post's outer positions with a weight and volume that made the ground shake in a way that was different from the long-range shelling Vareth Kell had grown almost comfortable with. This was close. This was aimed. Grace told him to get in the bunker. He told her he was staying. She looked at him for 2 full seconds. He did not move. "Stay behind the command structure," she said. "Don't move from that position. If I tell you to run, you run." He nodded. She went. He pressed himself against the outer wall of the command structure and watched. What he saw in the next 11 hours was something he knew he would spend the rest of his life trying to describe accurately and failing. Briggs ran the defense from the open command post. Not from inside. From outside. Standing at a table with screens and comms units set up under a partial overhead cover that would not have stopped very much if something had landed close. His voice on the comm lines was the same voice Vareth Kell had heard on the very first day. Even, measured, certain. He called fire support adjustments, shifted squad positions, and routed resupply to sections that were running low, all without raising his voice by a single degree. Twice, impacts hit close enough that debris scattered across the command area. Briggs brushed it off his sleeve and kept talking. Caffrey's squad got cut off. It happened in the second hour of the push, when the northeast threat pushed a flanking element around the edge of the post's defensive line faster than expected. The squad was forward when the gap closed behind them. And comms went intermittent, not gone but broken, cutting in and out. For 40 minutes, Vareth Kell stood at the wall of the command structure and listened to Briggs try to reach them on the line, getting fragments, losing signal, getting fragments again. He watched Briggs's face during those 40 minutes. It did not change. Not once. The man kept working, kept managing the rest of the defense, kept moving pieces and routing support. But every few minutes he reached for the comm unit and tried the frequency again. 40 minutes. Then Caffrey's voice came through clearly. "Post, this is Caffrey. We've taken secondary position Delta. 4 on our feet, 2 walking wounded. Requesting extract route." Briggs closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he gave the extract route. The squad came back through the wire 40 minutes later. A dirty and quiet and together. Caffrey had a cut above his eye that he had not mentioned on the comm. He reported in to Briggs with a flat, brief summary of what the squad had done, flanked the element that had cut them off, taken their position from behind, held it until extract. Briggs listened, asked 2 questions, and said, "Good work." That was all. Then there was Carla Voss. Vareth Kell saw it from his position at the wall. A soldier from one of the outer sections had been hit in a stretch of open ground between 2 structures, caught in a gap during a push, unable to move, in a spot that was still being swept by enemy fire. The ground around him was not safe. Vareth Kell watched the angle of the incoming fire, ran the calculation instinctively, and concluded that moving to that position had a very low probability of survival. The Carla Voss came out of the comm station at a run. She crossed the open ground fast and low, reached the soldier, and checked him in 3 seconds. Then she grabbed him by the drag handle on the back of his gear and pulled. She was not large. He was. She pulled anyway. She moved backward across the open ground, dragging him, her legs driving against the dirt, and she made it to cover. She went back to her station. 15 minutes later, the incoming fire angle shifted, and the same stretch of open ground became dangerous again from a different direction. A second soldier went down in almost the same spot. Carla Voss looked at the ground. She looked at the soldier. She went again. She was halfway back with the second soldier when a round hit near enough to her that Varathkel heard the impact clearly from his position. She went down, not flat, just to one knee, catching herself, and then she kept moving. She made it to cover, pulled the soldier in after her, and then sat down heavily against the wall. Her left leg was bleeding badly. A medic reached her in under a minute. She told him to see to the soldier she had just dragged in first. He argued. She repeated herself. He saw to the soldier first. When she finally let him look at the leg, she was still sitting upright, still watching the fight, her notebook somehow open in her hand, and she was still drawing. The attack broke at sundown. The enemy offensive, which had hit the post from 3 directions with everything they had, collapsed against the line that had never moved. The perimeter held. Every human position held. The post went into a careful, exhausted quiet. The soldiers came back from the line, set their weapons down, and sat. Not dramatically, not with any ceremony. They just sat, and let the stillness settle over them. Varathkel was still against the wall of the command structure. He had not moved from that spot in 11 hours. He was not certain his legs would work properly if he tried. He became aware at some point that Grace had come to stand near him, close enough that she could have touched his arm. She said nothing. She just stood there. After a while, he walked away from the wall and sat down on the ground about 10 meters from the post entrance, in the open, facing the smoke-dark eastern horizon. He sat there for a long time. Grace found him still there much later. She crouched beside him. "Are you all right?" she said. He thought about the honest answer for a moment. In all the years I have served the Council," he said slowly, "I have observed 17 species under conditions of armed conflict." He paused. "I have never seen anything like what I watched today." Grace was quiet. "Your people did not break," he said. "They were hit from every side. They lost contact with a squad for 40 minutes. They had soldiers go down in open ground, and the line never moved." He turned to look at her. "How do you not break?" She thought about it for a long time, looking at the same horizon he had been looking at. "I don't know," she said finally. "I just know we don't." Somewhere behind them, someone had started a small fire. Voices gathered around it, low, tired, familiar. Caffrey's voice, Pruitt's voice, Holt's voice. The same people who had been under fire all day sitting together in the dark, were talking quietly like the day had been long but normal. Varathkel listened to them and did not speak. He had come here to observe. He had observed, and he was no longer certain that any words in any language he knew were going to be enough. The Galactic Council chamber was the largest interior space Varathkel had ever stood in. It rose high above him in a sweep of pale stone and light. The curved rows of delegate seats, filled with representatives from 31 species, all of them looking down at the floor where he stood with his data recorder, his notes, and nothing else. No visual aids, no prepared slides. He had decided on the transport home that he was not going to give them a presentation. He was going to tell them what he had seen. The chamber director announced his name and his purpose and invited him to begin. Varathkel looked up at the rows of faces. Some of them were expressions he could read. Some of them were not. He had been gone for 2 weeks. He felt like he had been gone for a year. He set his data recorder on the stand in front of him and did not open it. "I was sent to the human war front on Kale 4 to conduct a threat assessment," he said. The council wanted to know if the reports coming from the front were accurate. It wanted to understand the full nature of the human military capability. I am here to tell you what I found. He paused. I will not give you casualty ratios or tactical efficiency scores. You have analysts for that. I will tell you what I saw, and I will trust you to understand why it matters. A delegate from the Parathi bloc shifted in his seat. Varath Kel had worked with him before. The man had no patience for anything that could not be expressed as a number. Varath Kel ignored him and kept going. On my first night at the post, the facility was struck by long-range indirect fire. I expected to find the soldiers taking cover. Instead, I found one of them sitting outside eating a meal and explaining to me, in a calm and almost bored tone, that the shelling was designed to ruin their sleep. He acknowledged that it worked. Then he continued eating. A few sounds in the chamber, not quite laughter. More like discomfort. I want you to understand something about that moment, Varath Kel said. That soldier was not performing courage for my benefit. He was not pretending to be unafraid. He was genuinely, functionally unbothered by the fact that weapons were landing near him. Not because he did not understand the danger, because he had already made some internal decision about the danger that allowed him to keep eating his meal. I did not fully understand that decision until the end of my visit. He walked them through it slowly. The morning advance through the settlement, the squad moving in near silence, splitting perfectly, taking the position in under a minute. The enemy wounded being called in for medical support without discussion, as if saving the people trying to kill you was simply what you did. Private Aaron Holt wrapping his arm and going back on the line, because the wound was not bad enough to matter. I asked the lieutenant assigned to me why they called in medical support for the enemy wounded, he said. She looked at me as though the question confused her. She said because they're wounded. That was the full extent of her explanation. Because they're wounded. As if the fact of a wound was sufficient reason to help, regardless of whose wound it was. He told them about the card games and the card tricks, about Carla Voss drawing portraits in a field notebook in the gaps between combat operations, about Pruitt making people laugh through artillery strikes and grief alike, about the two soldiers who did not come back on the fifth night and the hour of stillness that followed, and then the quiet, steady way the unit picked itself back up and went on. I watched them grieve, he said. I want to be precise about that. I do not mean they processed the loss efficiently or compartmentalized it in a way that protected their function. I mean they felt it. They sat with it. They were, for a short while, simply people who had lost people they cared about. And then they stood up and went back to work. With the grief still in them, still carrying it, he paused. I have spent 11 years in council service. I have observed armed conflict on 7 worlds. Every time, I have watched sentient beings attempt to reduce their emotional experience in order to fight, to become, for the duration of conflict, something simpler and harder than what they normally were. Humans do not do this. They take everything with them. The love and the grief and the exhaustion and the humor and the fear, all of it, and they carry it all into the fight and they keep going anyway. I do not have a word in my language for that. I am not sure any language has the right word. He told them about Caffrey's squad going dark for 40 minutes, about Briggs standing at the open command post with debris landing near him, and his voice unchanged, still routing fire support and supply lines and extraction routes, about the line that held for 11 hours. And then he told them about Carla Voss. He told them about the open ground, about the angle of the fire, about the odds he had calculated in real time. He told them about the first soldier she dragged to cover, and the second one in the round that knocked her to one knee, and the way she got back up anyway. He told them about the argument with the medic, which she won. He told them about the notebook, still open in her hand. She was still drawing, he said. After all of that, she was still drawing the people around her. The chamber was very quiet. The delegate from the Parathi bloc had stopped shifting in his seat. Varath Kel looked up at the rows of faces again, and he had one more thing to say, and he had been thinking about how to say it since the night he sat in the dirt outside the post, watching the smoke rise from the eastern horizon. This council has been debating for several years whether humanity should be granted formal membership and a permanent seat in this chamber, he said. I understand the hesitation. They are young by galactic standards. Their history is violent. Their technology is still catching up to ours in several areas. These are legitimate concerns. He let the silence sit for a moment. But I want to suggest to you that we have been asking the wrong question. The question is not whether humanity deserves a seat at this table. After what I saw on KL4, I do not think that is a question worth asking anymore. He picked up his data recorder. The question, he said, is whether we deserve to have them. He stepped back from the stand. The chamber stayed quiet for a long time. He did not wait for the vote. He collected his things and walked out, down the long corridor that led away from the chamber floor, through the pale stone hallways of the council building, and out into the open air. He stood there and breathed for a moment, feeling the difference between this air and the smoke-heavy air of KL4. And he thought about the fire at the base of the post on that last night. He thought about Grace and Caffrey and Holt sitting around it in the dark, tired and quiet and together, talking about nothing important, none of them knowing that a room full of alien diplomats was slowly, reluctantly, and beginning to understand what they had built. Not in the laboratories or the shipyards or the weapons programs, but out there in the dirt and smoke of a war zone that should have broken them and did not. He thought about Pruitt, probably making someone laugh right now. He thought about Carla Voss, probably drawing. He thought about Briggs, probably walking his circuit, knowing every name. The council chamber behind him had erupted in sound, voices, debate, the procedural noise of 31 species trying to agree on something together. He did not go back in. He had said what he had to say. He sat down on the steps outside and opened his data recorder one last time. Final entry, he said. The humans are still on KL4. The war front is still active. The line is still holding. He paused. It will keep holding. And I am certain of that now. Not because of their weapons or their training or their numbers. He looked out at the open sky above the council building. Because of who they are when it costs them something. And it always costs them something. And they keep going anyway. He closed the recorder. Inside, the vote was beginning.